What would you do if you were trying to enjoy a quiet walk on the beach and you noticed something odd in the sand? Would you let your curiosity override your caution and take a closer look? Or would you walk away? If you aren't sure, then hearing about the mysterious debris washing up in the Pacific Northwest might help you make up your mind. Hey there.
Hey there.
So, this is a story you said you hadn't heard much about, except for me.
Yeah, it was the first time I ever heard of it.
So, for more than a decade, beachgoers along the Salish Sea have been finding some pretty nasty souvenirs to take home. Are you familiar with the dismembered feet of Vancouver, BC?
I wasn't till you told me about it.
Well, let me tell you a little bit more. Ready to get weird?
Yep. Weird as fuck.
So, it all started in 2007 when a family was visiting Jedediah Beach in Vancouver, British Columbia. And their little 6-year-old ran ahead of them, as 6-year-olds are wont to do. Remember when the boys used to do stuff like that?
Of course.
And she found a shoe on the beach. And being a little kid, she picked the shoe up and she looked inside and then she showed it to her mom. And chaos ensued because inside was a sock and in the sock was a foot.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm assuming there was also therapy because holy shit, she picked up a foot on the beach. Unfortunately, that wasn't the last one. In all, in the first year, they found 5 human feet encased in shoes, all within the same general area along the Salish Sea.
Sounds like a serial killer to me.
Well, a lot of people thought that too because we've had our fair share of serial killers out of Washington State and Vancouver, BC.
Yeah.
We had Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. We had Ted Bundy. You may have heard of him. And there have been others over the years. So around the Seattle area, there's a pretty healthy crime element. So a lot of locals did really think that maybe we had somebody who was leaving macabre souvenirs along the beach for people to find. But anthropologists weren't so sure. So they took a bit closer look and they even considered that it might be from a plane crash that had happened a couple of years before. A small plane with 4 people inside had gone down and they hadn't been recovered. Most of them hadn't been recovered. And there were 5 feet, 4 missing bodies, and there was a pretty good chance that these feet might belong to those people.
Yeah, but why just feet?
I'll explain that.
There should be other body parts floating on.
You would think. Unfortunately, it did turn out that the bodies didn't belong to the people on the plane. The people on the plane were 4 men, um, 20s and 30s, healthy. These feet belonged to men and one woman. There were no women on the plane, so they knew that it wasn't connected in any way, which was unfortunate because that means that those bodies still haven't been recovered and their families still don't have closure, which is really, really sad. But that left the question: why feet? Why here? Why now? And who are these people and how did they end up in the water?
So do they do DNA tests or anything like that on them?
They actually did. And that's how they determined that they were not the feet of the people who belonged in the plane, and also that they were a woman's foot as well as men's feet. So they found out that not only were the feet apparently not connected with any missing persons cases where they thought that maybe foul play was involved, but that most of the feet that have turned up over the years actually belong to people who'd ended up in the water by their own choice, so either suicide or misadventure. To date, there have been 20 feet that have showed up. 20 separate
That's a lot of feet.
individual feet that have washed up. And they've washed up all along the Salish Sea, some of them in remote areas where they've been found by hikers and kayakers. And one actually showed up in downtown Vancouver along the waterway. So imagine you're out going for a stroll with your dog and He
Your
brings you this lovely Easter egg.
your dog finds a new chew toy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why leash laws were enacted. So now police do acknowledge that some of the feet could belong to victims of violent crime. They haven't identified all of them over the years, but they think that most of those people, like I said, are people who ended up in the water by their own choice, either through misadventure or because they leapt off of one of the many bridges that are around Vancouver, BC, and Seattle. And like all things that end up in the water, human bodies start to decompose pretty quickly, even in the cold waters of the Salish Sea. Um, and the reason for that, obviously, is that your skin begins to slip more readily when it's submerged in the water. Humans aren't meant to be in the water for extended periods of time. And so our skin lets go pretty quickly. People have been ending up in the waters around Seattle and Vancouver for a long, long time. But before recent advancements in clothing materials, we would just sort of fall apart and become one with the tides. We'd be preyed upon by animals that were living in the water or just decompose and become part of the sediment that's in the bay. But with new materials in our shoes, especially, they're finding that once the body becomes disarticulated, the parts that are enclosed in those materials float to the surface.
Yummy.
Yeah. Um, and once that happens, those body parts become caught in the currents and they end up on our beaches. And those materials became very popular and very readily available, even to people at sort of the lower, in sort of lower income brackets, if you will, within the past 15 or 20 years. And so it's happening more frequently. But it's not just the Salish Sea that this happens on. They found body parts off the coast of the Carolinas, off the coast of South America, and even on the Mississippi River. They've had the same things sort of happen. So we go into the water, unfortunately, we die, and our bodies start to decompose, and, hands, heads, other limbs do what they normally would do. But feet, because they're in athletic shoes, and all of these feet have been found in athletic shoes, pop to the surface and are carried off to where they're inevitably found by someone.
It's just weird because you'd think there'd be more than just feet, but it makes sense because they're got the tennis shoes on and they'd float.
Well,
Make little feet floats.
Yeah, that's the worst Easter egg hunt in history. It really is. So far, like I said, there's been 20 that have shown up. And it began in August of 2007 on Jedediah Island. A little girl found a size 12 Adidas shoe containing a man's right foot. That one was believed to be a suicide. On August 26th, just 6 days later, on Gabriola Island, a couple out for a stroll found another size 12 Reebok. So same size, large feet, different people. Then on February 2nd of the following year, on Valdez Island, BC, a man's right foot inside a size 12, or size 11, rather, Nike, washed up. And then his left foot came up on June 16th of the same year off of Westham Island.
So Adidas and Nikes float really well then.
And apparently so do New Balance. There's quite a few New Balance shows that show up. So if that's the sort of gift you're looking to give society, those are the shoes you should be wearing. I think also probably when people commit suicide, they're wearing the clothing when they go into the water. When people are out hiking or doing other things, they might be wearing their equipment. They're not finding a lot of people who are wearing like deck shoes and the aqua socks that you get, the shoes that you can wear into the water so you don't cut your feet on the rocks.
Yeah.
They're not finding a lot of those. These are all athletic and hiking shoes, with the exception of one cowboy boot that shows up.
Wouldn't think that would float at all.
Well, it didn't. On May 22nd of 2008 in Kirkland Island, BC, a woman's right foot was found inside a blue and white New Balance sneaker. That one was believed to be a suicide. Her other foot showed up on November 11th of the same year. On August 1st of 2008, near Pisht, Washington, a seaweed-covered right foot inside a man's black size 11 shoe was discovered by a camper on the beach. That was the first one that showed up outside of Canadian waters, but there are quite a few that do over the years. On October 27th of 2009 in Richmond, BC, a right foot in a size 8.5 Nike running shoe showed up. That one belonged to a Vancouver area man who'd been reported missing the previous winter, and they believe that one might have been a suicide as well. There was another one that showed up on August 27th of 2010 on Whidbey Island, Washington. That one is either a woman's foot or a child's foot. They aren't sure, and it hasn't been identified yet. So we still don't know. There was one that showed up on December 5th of 2010 in Tacoma, Washington, and that one was a child's foot inside a hiking boot. That one remains unknown, so which is really unusual to me because you would believe that if your child went missing, it would be all over the news. We know how we handle it here in Washington State. When a kid goes missing, everybody's on the lookout.
It's a big deal, and usually somebody has got to report it missing, so that's kind of weird that nobody knew about it or who it is. It's kind of strange.
I thought so too. And, as of my research into this, things could have changed since then. I haven't found anything, but they didn't have any reports to match it to, which just is really suspicious to me.
Yeah, it seems really strange.
Let's see. On August 30th of 2011 in False Creek, BC, another foot and lower leg bone were found in a man's blue and white running shoe floating next to the Plaza of Nations Marina. So this was more than just the foot. There was one that showed up November 4th in 2011 in Sassamat Lake, BC. Campers found a man's right foot inside a size 12 hiking boot. That was in a pool of fresh water. The remains were determined to be that of a man who'd gone missing in 1987. So it had been in the water for quite a while. And it's interesting to note that something like that, I mean, he was in the water for almost 30 years. How did it show up in the condition that it was in? And it's because when the human foot is in the water and it's sealed up like it is in a shoe, rather than decomposing, the fat turns into something called adipocere. And adipocere is like sort of a waxy soap. And so,
Ew.
yeah, it's almost like mummification, but not quite. And so it preserves it so that when you pull it out of the water, it's not completely skeletonized. It still largely resembles a foot and is something that anthropologists and people in the biz can identify.
Surprising how many people are committing suicide, but I guess you hear about a lot of boat accidents, stuff like that. I mean, when you add it all up, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, and
you don't think about it till you find dead shoes with feet in them. It's kind of, then you find out, oh, I guess that person did suicide and that person didn't, and it's just weird.
it is. I mean, I think if you're not involved with a family or a person who has gone missing or been killed or taken their own life, it's really easy to sort of divorce yourself from the reality of it, that this is happening. But then you read stories like this and you realize that all of these people are dealing with these issues that are so much larger than you can possibly imagine. And you're living in a city where, even though you're surrounded by people, it's really easy to see yourself as being very much isolated.
You know, the news tends to shove suicides under the rug, and you don't hear about suicide near as much. You do like murder and kidnappings and all that kind of stuff, they tend to hush hush about it, and you don't hear as much about it.
Well, I think that there's a couple of reasons behind that. The obvious one is that it's easier to sensationalize a violent crime than it is when somebody commits suicide. It's just immeasurably sad.
Yeah.
But also, I've read, and there was an issue on this happening, especially on some of the tribal lands in Utah and Wyoming and Montana, where when they focus too closely on suicides within the community, it it's almost like a virus that goes through, and it creates sort of these situations where people are so strongly impacted by what they're hearing that it almost drives them to replicate. It creates suicide clusters, is what they're saying. And so one person does it, and then you realize just how bleak and horrible your life is. And that seems like, hey, that's a great idea. Now they're free of the pain. And I remember thinking after myself, after 9/11 happened, that I was so afraid for what the world was going to become that I even started myself thinking, wow, those people don't have to worry about this anymore, and how lucky are they? And that's a really, really frightening way to think. And if you're already of the mindset that this is this is on your mind, and you're thinking that ending your life might be the best option for you, and then somebody close to you does it, or you hear about somebody doing it, you start thinking that it's a positive thing.
Yeah, and it's never a positive thing.
It never is. So I can understand. I mean, there's obviously the sensationalism of the news that we have nowadays. Everything is blown up and made so much bigger because that's how you get people to pay attention. And if people are paying attention and watching your program, then advertisers are going to be paying to put ads, and that's how you make money. And but also because reporting on suicides can be kind of dangerous for the people who are listening, especially if they're already of the mindset that this is something that they're considering doing.
Yeah, I like that one show that I was watching, the
13 Reasons
tape,
Why.
13 Reasons Why. Yeah, that started a bunch of kids committing suicide, and now they have all kinds of warnings before and after the show because of what it caused people to do.
Yeah, and it seemed,
Sad.
I remember hearing that, and it seemed really strange to me, and that's why I started reading, because I thought, well, yeah, people really wouldn't be impacted by this. I mean, it's just a TV program. And then I started reading about the clusters and the numbers and thinking, oh my God, it really could. And I can understand why. I remembered, thinking back to those times. And, I had two small children, and it wasn't something that I would ever, you know, harm myself. My kids needed me. But I could definitely understand how people's minds would go there.
Yeah, just especially when you're a teenager too, your hormones, everything's going, and everything seems so much worse than it can be.
Everything is so big.
Yeah, because it's
And you
all you
feel
have
so
in your
small and
life.
powerless. Yeah. That's the one thing that you can
Yeah,
control. No, I'm not going to pretend that I understand and I know all and I see all, but I get it. If you're listening to this, don't. Just don't.
do not commit suicide. It's not worth it.
It's a very permanent
Talk to
solution.
somebody.
It's a very permanent solution to a very temporary problem.
Yep, you have a lot of years to live. It's not, whatever it isn't bad enough to just kill yourself over. But the whole thing's just weird that think that you'd hear more on the news about feet. I mean, I've never heard anything on the news about people finding feet on the
I
beaches and stuff. So
I think
that's
if
kind of
you're in
weird.
Seattle and BC, people are talking about it, but we're a little further south, so there are other things to talk about down here.
But you said they found one in Vancouver. We should have heard
Vancouver,
about that.
BC, not
Oh,
Vancouver,
okay.
Washington.
I said we should have heard about that on the news.
Oh no, we would have heard
So,
about that. No, this is all along the Salish Sea in near Vancouver, British Columbia.
so the conditions must be just right there and not in other places, or this would be everywhere.
It is. And let me finish going through the list, and I've got a little blurb on that too. So where was I? The camper's foot. The campers found the foot. Man who'd gone missing in '87. Another one showed up in January of 2016 near the Maritime Museum in Vancouver. Um, Another one in May of 2014 in Seattle, a human foot in a New Balance shoe. So another one from New Balance. In February 7th of 2016 on Vancouver Island, a human foot in a sock and running shoe near Port Renfrew on Vancouver Island. December 8th, 2017 on Vancouver Island, the remains of a leg with a foot still in the shoe on the Jordan River. Another one on Gabriola Island in 2018. Unfortunately, a hiker thought he saw an empty hiking boot wedged in a log jam. It wasn't empty. September 2018, there was one in West Vancouver, BC, another Nike running shoe. And in January 2019, on Jetty Island in Everett, a foot in a boot. And that was somebody who had been missing since 2016. So another person that they think, I mean, misadventure happens. We hear about it all the time. Being so close to Mount Hood, we hear about people who go up on the mountain and don't come back down, or who go hiking in the national forests and don't come back. There's a good portion of these folks that fit that bill, but they also know that there are a good portion of them that don't. So according to Vox Media, this list, although it seems excessive, 20 people in 13 years, it's really not. And it's not uncommon compared to other areas. The reason that we see it in such a concentrated area here up north is because of the way the currents carry debris into the island near Vancouver Island. So once the feet become disarticulated, because our feet are actually held on by a few tendons, and once the body starts to break down, those tendons snap pretty quickly. It doesn't take much. It can happen within just a few days to just a couple of weeks of us being in the water. And then they, like I said, pop to the surface in our New Balance running shoes as they go up. And then the currents that come along through Seattle and into the Salish Sea in that area around Vancouver, BC, are just perfect for pushing debris into the sandy, beachy areas where people go for walks. And so we have all of these. I mean, who knows how many others have turned up that people haven't seen?
Yeah, I've seen shoes that I've never thought to actually. Yeah, I've seen them like stuck in crap on the side of the river, but I've never picked one up. I just like, I don't want to touch it anyway. But now I'm gonna be like, I should pick that up and see if there's a foot in it.
See, and that's always whenever I go anywhere and I see like a garbage bag, my first thought is always, it's a serial killer. There are body parts in there. Um, and I see not so much along the highway, but even before this story, when I would see shoes like on the beach, that was always my first thought. Serial killer. Somebody's dead, and that's her shoe. More than likely not, but it's something to consider. And we're kind of in an area where it wouldn't be uncommon to see something like that there either. So it could happen here.
Yeah, definitely could happen. Be strange to find one.
So that's the story of the 20 feet that showed up around Vancouver, BC in the past 13 years, and why the human body falls apart in water and then bobs to the surface selectively in parts.
And apparently, if you have a size 12 or 13 shoe, it's going to be a much better chance of it getting to the shore.
I know, evidently larger feet float better.
Which makes sense.
It does make sense. I wonder if it's because there's so much more surface area to the shoe.
Well, it's a massive foot. So,
it's a big old foot, yeah.
So the more flotation there is, the more it's going to get to the shore. It's probably why you don't see as many smaller ones. It seems like they're all bigger feet, mainly.
Yeah, mostly men's feet. There have been a couple of women's feet that have shown up. And of course, one child's foot. But you figure, I mean, my feet aren't small. I wear a size 6.5 in men's. My hiking boots, my work boots that I have are a size 6.5. So size 12 is pretty
Yeah, it's
big. That's a big foot.
Which makes sense. More of them wouldn't make it to the shore than smaller feet would.
Yeah, and most of these that were reported were sizes, 10, 11, 12. So
Yeah, it makes sense.
it does make sense. But it also makes me wonder how many of those feet ended up in shipping lanes and got churned up by boats or
went somewhere else that you would never hear about.
Well, yeah, because when Fukushima happened, we ended up with debris from here on the Pacific coast.
Got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we had boats and we had portions of buildings and God only knows what else.
Well, they're showing a lot of stuff in the news, so
yeah,
it's possible.
Well, it's been a few years since that happened, so it's the debris field has slowed down at least. So there's that. How do we end this?
I don't know. And that's the end of the story.
And that's the end of our tale. Tune in next week where we talk about bones in the lake.
As Weird as Fuck continues.
Want to stay connected between shows? Find us on Instagram at WeirdAsFCKPodcast, on Facebook at WeirdAsFCKPodcast, on Twitter at WeirdAsFuckPod1, they're a little bit more open-minded, or on the web at www.weirdasfck.com. There you can check out our blog, get more information on each episode, pick up some merch, send us ideas for future shows, or share your own weird experiences. You might even make it on a future episode. We would love to hear from you. Until then, tune in and keep it weird. Are you entertained? Step on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your 5-star rating helps to boost us up in the listings so other podcast listeners can find the show.